Welcome to ThoughtBreak, the show which propels you to get off the treadmill, reset your compass, and find your true north, hopefully. Today on the show, I have Mr. Tim Huiting, a global HR executive who has had an illustrious career with some great companies such as Convergys, Microsoft, and more recently, he's been the CEO and on the board of a few companies, including his own. So Tim, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, Ashutosh.
It's great to see you, Tim. And you have an amazing background I see there. You seem to be in a very nice place right now.
Yes, I'm currently, I live up in the mountains in a resort in Colorado in the US. So I'm retired from the corporate world now, but very active in the community. I'm on several boards. I'm president of the Keystone Owners Association, which represents all of the HOAs and homeowners in Keystone Resort with the county executives and with the resort executives. So utilizing my skills in a different way instead of the corporate world, but still very active in the community.
That's amazing to know, Tim. I've always heard great things about you and the fact that you have, of course, kept yourself very active. And the other important thing is in your career, the amount of mentoring you have done for a lot of senior executives and advice you've given to some people who have grown along with you and around you is amazing. So I have to tell you, I've heard great reviews about you. So Tim, today we'll focus on providing our listeners with some interesting thought advice from you on a few questions which I had, and this is a quick show. So okay. Pardon me if I cut you at some places. So my first question, Tim, really is about you, like everyone, start off your career, which probably, as I heard in the last conversation sometime back when we were talking, was not necessarily in HR, but you soon became a global HR leader, of a lot of good recognition. So could you just walk us through how did your career start and what is the turning point?
Sure. Well, coming out of high school when I went to college, I was determined I was going to be a math and science teacher. So when I was at university, my degree was in math and science education. But along the way, while I lived in the residence halls of university, I was a resident assistant and very active in all of the campus life organizations. And somewhere along the line, my residence hall director said, you really should go into student personnel, which is a career for university administrators in the student affairs area. And so I said, well, and I would have to get a master's in student personnel in order to do that. And I would have to leave the state where I was living. And I just was kind of not sure that I wanted to do that. And I still remember his piece of advice is one that I fell back on many times in my career. And he said, Tim, the people who really get ahead in this world are the people who take a risk and do something that they're not sure of. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to, because I really loved that activity. So I did drop my math. I finished my degree in math and science, but I went and got my master's in student personnel administration and then started a career in university administrations in the student affairs division at a couple different universities. And so that was perhaps similar to the HR world. But then after about 7 years, one of the things I learned is that working in student affairs at a university, people do the same job for many, many years. Some people do the same job for 20, 25 years. And even though I liked what I was doing, there's no way I could do the same thing for that long. And so I decided to get another degree. And while working at the University of Cincinnati, I got another degree in computer science and completely switched careers and went into the business world as a software developer, which I loved doing. But along the way, in the company that I was in, Convergys at that time, they started doing management workshops. And because of my background in university and student leadership, they asked me if I would facilitate manager workshops. So I said yes. And as I started facilitating manager workshops as a business leader, that just became at one point I was spending almost a third of my time doing leadership and management seminars, even though I had other jobs. At that time, I had moved into different positions. And then at one point they just said, well, you're really good at this, and the people love you. Why don't you move into an HR role in terms of head up the organization development and all of the leadership and management training? So I did that, although I wasn't in an HR role proper. And then at one point when I was in India, they asked me to take over as head of HR for India for Convergys, just temporarily, and stay there a few weeks. And I ended up staying there for 8 years, as you know.
2 weeks to 8 years. That's
2 weeks became 8 years. And I was the head of HR for India, then the head of HR for all of EMEA for Convergys. So I kind of went full circle, started in...
So Tim, let me just ask you something interesting there. I have seen, and in my career as well, and a lot of people, move from where they got trained their degree from, their profession they started off with, and they went on to do something else. And somewhere, while they follow that with passion, I've seen that somewhere in the late 30s or early 40s or somewhere in the middle of the career, they suddenly dissociate themselves or stop liking what they're doing. So it's a very strange phenomena. You give up something which you studied for, you get into something which you liked, you thought a lot, and then, sometime in the middle of a career, you start feeling bored about it or monotonous about it, or you don't feel the juice of the work you're doing anymore. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I've always thought it's very important to like what you're doing. And in order to be really successful at it, you have to have a passion for it. You have to like what you're doing. And one of the things I used to talk about when I did leadership seminars, that everybody's heard of the Peter Principle, which is that people tend to get promoted to their level of incompetence. And then I had my own principle that I used to talk about. I never came up with a great name for it other than the Tim Principle, but often people get promoted to their level of unhappiness. They're always searching more status, more money. And as you move up the ladder, along with that status comes more responsibility, more decisions, more headaches. And eventually they work themselves into a job that they really don't enjoy doing. And then it's just not worth it. And it's really hard to be successful doing something that you don't really enjoy doing. You may be competent, and that's where I think the Peter Principle kind of misses out sometimes. You may be very good at it. I've had many times when people have said to me, oh, Tim, you should do this, you're so good at it. And I said, but I don't enjoy it. So if I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to have any passion for it and be really good at it. So, and one of the ways that I kept motivated through my career is to keep moving in different positions. Usually 3 years is about the length of time that I do any job before I start to get bored with it. There's been some exceptions where it's something I really love to do that I've done it like 5 or 6 years, but typically about 3 years. So I always tell people, don't be afraid to move laterally and try something different. Don't always be looking up, I need to move up. To be successful, I have to move up. And one of the examples I often use is if you look at the chief executives of many organizations or people in very high positions, they have people that have worked across the organizations in multiple roles. It may be sales, it may be marketing, it may be development, it may be HR, it may be in finance. And I've done roles in all of those areas. And those are the people who are successful because they have an appreciation for the total scope of the business. And so I always tell people, don't be afraid to move laterally, because moving laterally, you may find something that you love to do that you never thought you would love to do. If anybody would have told me I would have been head of HR for a major organization, I would have said, I don't think that's going to happen. But that's where I ended up. But it was through trial and error in lots of different positions across the career.
I think that was an amazing thing you said there, Tim. I mean, it's at the cost of repeating, I do want to say that a lot of people who even talk to me today or, when we connect, say that they've always looked movement upwards, a vertical movement upwards. And, I think a lot of people do not focus on the horizontal richness of the movement, right? The lateral movement, like you said, without which they can never become a chief executive end of the day. And that's equally important. So it's amazing what you just said there. And, you tend to enjoy that more. The second thing which you said there stuck with me is that, doing this every 3 years is probably a great idea of looking for another gig, another job within your job. You don't have to change a company necessarily, but
Right.
that's really important. So superb. I loved what you said there. Tim,
Ashutosh, one of the things I
yeah,
often ask people when I would do seminars is, I would talk to a group and I would say, well, how many of you really want to be promoted? Of course, almost everybody raises their hand. And then
yeah, everyone say.
I would ask, well, how many of you want to be CEO of this company? Well, then very few people would raise their hand. So I said, well, you want to get promoted, but you don't want to go all the way to CEO. So when is it that you're going to stop wanting to be promoted? And people just kind of look at me because they never have an answer to that question. If you want to be promoted, when do you stop wanting to be promoted? And that's when I get into the concept of searching for what really makes you happy and what you really enjoy doing, because the status and the money disappears very quickly. And that if you, like I've said before, if you really want to be successful, you have to enjoy what you're doing and be passionate about it, regardless of what level in the organization it is. And sometimes you don't find that unless you do move horizontally and look at different aspects of a big organization and find out what it is that you really enjoy doing, because sometimes you don't know until you do.
Very well said, Tim. And I think a lot of people who probably hear this show can take that as a formula for not only enjoying their career, but obviously trying to keep their career rich and going and enriching. So, Tim, I have another question though. In today's world, and this seems to be happening, like I was recently researching a lot, and, I saw that there's something called a WUI, a World Uncertainty Index. And WUI points about the frequency of changes in the world has gone up like 6 to 7 times more than before. It's very dynamic. The CEOs, the mid-career executives, the entrepreneur, the homemaker on sabbatical wanting to come back, they all kind of get hit by this. And it's very hard to predict a career. So, people get paranoid about it. What's your advice to that? Because like there are two kinds of people out there, people who have lost a job or people who are worried about losing the job. And if you were looking from that perspective, that lens, what do you have to say?
Well, one of the things I go back to, is I mentioned it earlier, is that way back when I was in college and my hall director, and when he said to me, when I was a little bit leery about changing from being a math teacher to go into student personnel, he said, the people who are really successful are the people who are willing to take risks. And so I think it's, we can go through the whole example of that, going outside your comfort zone is where you really start to learn and where you develop. And if you stay within your comfort zone, you're not going to develop. And so I've had to do that many times. When I decided to change careers when I was, working at the university, and completely changed and went into the business world as a software developer, which is like, 180-degree turn. There was some risk involved in there, but I said, and you have to be willing to say, well, it might not work. If it doesn't work, then I'll just try something else. But if you wait until it's something that you're sure of, and that you're not going to take that risk, and you're not going to discover some other things that you may really enjoy doing, and you're not going to learn. So I had many times came back to what, way back when I was a senior at college, and my hall director said, the successful people are the people who are willing to take risks and do something different, even though they're not sure about it and they're not comfortable with it. And I have used that more times in my career. Moving to India, for instance, was, I would have never thought that I would move to India, or taking on the role of HR when I had really no HR experience other than learning and development. So all of those things really paid off for me. And so that's what I guess I would advise people with. Don't be, and I've had this conversation with people that are, looking for a job, but they're looking for a job in such a narrow field or narrow scope because that's what they're comfortable with. And I said, don't be afraid to try something completely different. Take a job, even if it's a level lower, 2 levels lower, something you've not done before. It's a great experience. It's never going to hurt you to have experience doing something different. So if you're only looking for a job in the area where you've always worked and that you're comfortable, you're limiting your scope, number one, of finding a different position, and you're really limiting your scope of learning in terms of broadening your perspective and your future ability to find jobs.
So Tim, I have another question for you, is that you made a great point about people stepping out of the comfort zone, but there's always this bridge of fear people have to cross. You don't want to get away from what you really are good at doing or what you've always done for many years. That's the biggest hindrance people have to try something else because it's so easy to keep doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. What would be a tip for that?
Well, once again, I think you just have to take that risk and say, if it doesn't work out, at least I've learned something. I've had some jobs in my career that, I didn't really enjoy. They didn't really work out, but I always say, but I always learned something from doing that. And that eventually will come in handy. It may not come in handy immediately. And I always say, for people who, I've talked to many people recently, but in the past, who don't have a job and are looking for a job and they can't find exactly what they're looking for. And I say, doing anything is better than sitting idle for 9 months, even because you'll pick up some different skills, you'll learn something. And when you do go out looking, people will take that as a plus, that you'll actually went and tried something different or did something different and gained that experience. It's not going to be a negative. Even if you learn that you're not successful at it or it's not something that you enjoy doing, you'll always learn something. And so I guess to get over the fear, you just, even one of the things when I talked before about switching laterally within a company instead of moving directly out, I sometimes will talk to people that were worried about that was going to affect their performance rate because, well, now I'm really good at what I'm doing and I'm getting good performance ratings. And if I go try something different, I may not, be an outstanding performer, or I may just be a meets expectations performer. And I say, well, that's such a narrow way to look at expanding your career. It's very short-term focused. Doing different jobs within a company are the things that will get you ahead in the long run. And to worry about how it might affect your performance rating, to me, is a very short-term, silly way to look at it. So it's just, once again, it comes down to not being afraid to take the risk and try something different. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll move on and try something different. But anything is better than sitting idle for 9 months, just wishing that you could find a job doing what you're used to doing.
And what about people who are in the job? I mean, I think your advice was also about people who are in the job, even if they are happy with what they're doing. Should they try to do something on the left or the right? Or, because that's other cold feet they have about stepping into cold water.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, even if you're good at what you're doing, most people, will tend to get bored with it after a while. I always said, 3 to 5 years was kind of my time limit. And then, if you get bored with it, then you're not going to have as much passion about doing it. So I always advise people to move laterally. I used to love having performance discussions with people who weren't really doing very well on their job. Usually managers don't like those performance discussions. They like having performance discussions with the top performers. And I say, well, those are kind of boring to me. I love having performance discussions with people who may not be doing as well in their job, because typically, I always say, if somebody's not performing well in their job, it usually means that they're not in the right job. It has nothing to do with that they're not a good performer. It's just that they're not in the right job that currently fits their skills, their passion, their enthusiasm. And so often I get into that discussion with them about, do you like what you're doing? No, not really. So let's try to find where you and what I used to always say, and you probably heard me say this, Ashutosh, that when I have a performance discussion with somebody who's not a highly rated performer or not doing well, almost always they stand up and shake my hand and say thank you at the end instead of being angry at me, because I open their thinking to, well, maybe I should be doing something different, and I'm just kind of stuck in this rut because this is what I've always been doing and what I know how to do, and you have to go out and find your passion, and if you're not doing well in your current job, like I said, it's not usually because you're a bad performer. You're just not doing the right job that fits your passion and your desires, and you sometimes just have to take the risk and try something different.
Very, very nicely put. And I think that message is very loud and clear, that if you, even if it takes a little bit of a push, break your inertia and try to step into the other side on the left, and especially if you're not performing well, then for sure that's the right way out. That's amazing. Tim, I think you've been really wonderful, giving some amazing tips here. I would like to end with any quick story you have. I know you probably have 1,000 stories or 10,000 stories around that. but let me urge you to of any specific story which you have, which is an interesting one, around how someone you thought world had given up on, or the companies you have worked with had given up. And you don't need to take names, obviously, here, but how did that person make the transition? A very quick one for the people's interest here.
I remember one particular person in I won't say the name of the company, but it was in India, and she was not performing well in a job. And I remember my boss said, "Oh, that's going to be the most difficult performance discussion. I'm getting ready for her to call me when she gets back from your review, because she was getting a very poor performance rating." And I said, "No, this will be fine." And anyway, like I said before, I was talking with her, and she didn't really like what she was doing. But she didn't really know what. So we spent the whole time talking about what she could be doing, and once again she thanked me at the end, and she said, "I'm so glad we had this discussion, because now I know what I'm going to do." And she went to work for a nonprofit in India, and a year later she said, "Oh, I just love what I'm doing. This is such," and you were the one who convinced me to leave the big corporate world doing this training job that I thought that's what I was always going to do. And now I'm loving it. And, I would always have that conversation with my boss to see, once again, to say, no, it wasn't a difficult conversation for me at all. And not only did she not call my boss, but she did call my boss a year later to say how happy she was and what she was doing. And so I've had many stories like that, where people come back to me a year later. I know another one where somebody said, I knew he just wasn't made for he was an HR person, but wasn't made for a big company, because, it just wasn't. When you work for a large company, you have to deal with a lot of corporate bureaucracy and stuff like that. And he got fired, and people always say, "Oh, that's so terrible that happened to him." And I say, sometimes getting fired from your job is the best thing that can happen to some people, especially if they're not performing well. And he got an HR job in a very small company, and a year later he came back to me and said, "That was the best thing you'll ever do, when you fired me." He said, "Because I just love what I'm doing now, and I just never was happy working in a big corporate environment." So sometimes people need to be pushed, and this is where sometimes I think that downsizings, even though people always say it's like the worst thing that can happen to people, I always say, given the right discussion and guidance, it's the best thing that can happen to people, because if they're being downsized, they're probably not in the right job for themselves. And if you can help them find the right job, that's the best thing that you can do for them, both professionally and personally. They become a much happier person doing what they enjoy doing.
That is great advice, and actually wonderful stories, because people can take away two very different points here. One is about always the fact that sometimes, getting out of the job could be a blessing in disguise to get on to doing something else. And it's a bit of a kick, it's a bit of a push, but that breaks inertia. And I definitely feel the example you gave of the performance, I've also seen a couple of places where people have actually gone, and you're right, tanked on trying something else, where, like the example of nonprofit was amazing. I mean, that was probably what she was meant to do, and she did it so well.
Right.
Tim, that is awesome. And I will let you enjoy the Colorado mountains. Is that what it is?
Yes.
What do they call it?
Yes.
And thank you so much for your time today. It is much appreciated. I'm sure the listeners who listen to you will also equally enjoy it.